Um, Thank you everybody for coming, and I would like to thank Sage Publishing for the honour of bestowing this grant upon me. I'm a newly minted academic, as I've practiced for about 30 years in social work. I'm always dabbling in academia and doing bits and pieces, but this is my first real deep dive into academic world. And the reason it's interesting was because I wanted to write about my experiences as a social worker, and particularly as an Aboriginal social worker, because many, many times when I would tell my stories about being a social work practitioner, people would often say, Linda, you need to write this stuff down. And I thought to myself, what's the best way to learn how to write? And somebody said, do a PhD, publishing by research. And I thought, that's actually a really good idea. So the opportunity came to me and I took it with both hands. And so coming to this award that I've been presented is really a first step for me, I think, in hopefully a really courageous and interesting move into publishing for myself. So again, thank you everybody for coming. Thank you for Liz and Jenny as well for coming. So I'll just start. Not share, okay. So am I able to share it now? All right, I just need to share. We always have to be patient with our technology, don't we? There it is. Oh, good. Okay. So my research, I did a lot of work in child protection for about 20 years, and I did some work in health, and I wanted to do something that was related to Aboriginal women, and not particularly child protection, because I wanted to do an area where I hadn't done a huge amount of work in. And so I thought this would be a really good, because I've heard lots of stories over my years of practice in terms of Aboriginal women and sexual assault and the experiences that they have. So I thought that would actually be really interesting and I would enjoy doing that. And everybody said to me, if you're doing a PhD, do it in something that you're going to really enjoy doing it in. So I thought, okay, well, that's what I'll do it in. I decided, there you go. So firstly, obviously, I would like to acknowledge the country that we're in. Given that I'm an Aboriginal woman, I would like to acknowledge the Bindal and Wulkarukabar people, but I would also like to acknowledge the lands on which I grew up on, which was Kalkadoon, which is Mount Isa, but also my Indigenous heritage is from the Bigambul people from southwest Queensland. So I would like to acknowledge that country as well. The elders past, present and emerging, including myself these days. So I'm a Bigambul woman from southwest Queensland, grew up in Mount Isa. Again, been a social worker for about 30 years now, which is starting to date me. I have 3 children and 6 grandchildren, but only 1 granddaughter, all the boys. So my advisory panel is Ines, which I'm not sure if she's online, and Vanita Mosby and Deborah Miles. Oh. It was interesting when we went to look for a mentor for me in terms of the Aboriginal. One of the challenges we had was finding somebody, and I remember Ines saying to me, "Once you become a doctor, you'll be able to do all of this work for other people." I said, "Oh, okay." So my thesis, I'll talk about the thesis topic, a brief description of the project, some of the data I've found already, some of the main points, the risk factors, some of the things that I think are going to, really resounding with me, why this research, some practice wisdom, some of the literature review, and why me. Okay, just getting rid of some of the stuff that's in front of me. So the thesis topic is Aboriginal women's, and I keep changing the wording of this title, but I need to get it down pat. So it's Aboriginal women's engagement with first responders and care services post-sexual assault. So basically what that means is I wanted to look at what the experiences for Aboriginal women who have experienced a sexual assault and have called first responders or attended a GP clinic significantly recently after the assault, and what their experience has been. Because anecdotally, I've heard that it's not a good experience. And the reason that I wanted to address that is because I often look for opportunities to engage in a therapeutic relationship with people who have experienced trauma, but may not necessarily be willing to or come to the attention of therapeutic services. And I thought, what's the best way for Aboriginal women to come to the, what's that pathway look like? How can we create a pathway? And I thought this would actually be a great opportunity. They've experienced a recent trauma. They've come to a service that could actually create a pathway or be a pathway to ongoing therapeutic intervention. Because I guess the broader issue for me is that I understand Aboriginal community well-being, the Aboriginal community's well-being is contingent upon women and men. And as a woman, I can't engage in the men's business. It's not appropriate culturally for me to do that. But I can engage, particularly at my age now, where I'm a bit older, I can engage in women's business and have some authority in that area culturally. And so one of the things I looked for is an opportunity to increase the well-being of Aboriginal communities through the well-being of Aboriginal women. Now, I've seen Aboriginal women who have experienced trauma and not recover, and how that impacts on the community, how that impacts on children and child rearing, health, the well-being of the family unit, etc. And I understand that if we can capture an opportunity like this, create a pathway for ongoing therapeutic counselling, whatever that looks like, then we would be ahead of the game. We actually start to heal our community, and overarching, that's the premise that I'm coming from. But coming back to this research, which is the first step. So the first step is to look at what the experiences are and how we can improve them if they need to be improved, and how we can highlight them if they're doing really well, because I'm sure that there are some aspects that do really well, and also then create a therapeutic pathway. So some of the data that's in relation to, there's not a lot of data in relation to sexual assault of Aboriginal women. In fact, there's lots of issues with it, but we do know that Indigenous people account for 5 to 6% of those seeking assistance for sexual assault, although Indigenous status was not identified for 9 to 11%, which is one of the issues. One of the issues is that they either don't ask if the person is Aboriginal, the person doesn't identify that they're Aboriginal, for lots of reasons, or that they record the data with Torres Strait Islander women. So you don't actually get a really clear look at what the data is for Aboriginal women. We know that Aboriginal women are 2 to 5 times more likely than non-Aboriginal women to have intimate partner violence. And we know that intimate partner violence quite often is associated with sexual violence as well. We also know that there's such a normalisation of sexual violence within relationships in the Aboriginal community. So when I remember doing some work in an Aboriginal community where somebody said to me, well, isn't that normally the way that that's how my parents showed love, was violence, etc., power, control? And I said, actually, no, that's not what a healthy relationship looks like. So when you're starting with that basis, you really have some work to do, I think. Okay, I'll just keep going because I'm aware I have some time issues. So there's lots of reasons that there's no actual data, and part of it was that, and even now we still include Torres Strait Islander people and Aboriginal people together when we really need to be separating them out and actually doing one or the other rather than speaking for both cultures, because they're very different, very distinct cultures. Recording is often poor. I've worked in an ED department. I know that we don't record when people present for certain things. We are very focused on medical rather than how they became ill or injured. We don't define what a sexual relationship and a healthy sexual relationship within the Aboriginal community is. And so I've had people who've said, you don't feel the love unless you feel the steel. So unless he or she is stabbing you, you can't really tell if they love you or not. They're willing to be that jealous, and jealousy is a huge issue in Aboriginal culture. Then that's how you can tell somebody's really in love with you. I thought that's not okay. There's obviously the lack of understanding within the Aboriginal community. what sexual assault is in relation to a domestic relationship versus a stranger. So I think there's some understanding that sexual violence from a stranger is considered rape, but within a relationship, it's not necessarily, it's part of the relationship. Okay. So there's also some risk factors. The distrust of police and other government services, and therefore women are less likely to report. Now, we know that Aboriginal women, we know that women, you know, are less likely to report sexual assault for lots of reasons. But Aboriginal women have an extra layer on top of that where, you know, I have read articles where women who have been sexually assaulted have contacted the police have presented and arrested them for outstanding warrants and taken them to jail rather than hospital. Like, if that's the level, like, it's just insane. But you can understand why there is that level of mistrust. There's, you know, but there's other things that you need to think about, like fear of being blamed, fear of retribution from the perpetrator's family is a huge issue. The other part is that Aboriginal women don't want Aboriginal men to go to jail. They just want the violence to stop. And for the whole community, I've been present when the whole community has presented to the airport for this man to be taken to jail, including his family, his partner, the whole community. Half the community came because he was going to jail for domestic violence. Now, anybody would think, why are they all here wishing this person off? Well, it's because they don't want them to go to jail. They just want the violence to end. Geographical location's always been a barrier because it's interesting that 2/3 of the population of Aboriginal people actually live on the coast, but the prevalence of what we're reading about is geographically isolated. And, you know, Aboriginal people, I'm not sure if people have heard about the Murray grapevine, but it's very healthy. And if you tell a story about a particular incident, then that's the story that gets told over the whole community. So if you have somebody who has had a bad experience with a doctor at a hospital, for example, then people are, as soon as they know that that doctor's on call or on duty, they will leave and come back another day when there's somebody else, to those sorts of extent. Lots of risk factors. So resolutions, things that we need to think about. Education about what a healthy sexual relationship looks like within Aboriginal communities, and this needs to start at all levels, from young to very old. Empowering Aboriginal men and women to want to change as well. Big believer in, and Aboriginal culture is a very equal culture in that Aboriginal women and Aboriginal men have responsibilities within the community. And so you can't just deal with Aboriginal women. You need to deal with Aboriginal men as well. Need services that will mirror the Aboriginal community, and any service delivery needs to be inclusive of Aboriginal people. It needs to be run by Aboriginal people, developed by Aboriginal people, staffed by Aboriginal people. And that's just some of the stuff that I'm finding in the research already, is that the services that have worked really well in terms of sexual assault has been developed by Aboriginal people of that community, because every community is different in how they want to manage the situation. But it's also been planned, inclusive, and staffed by Aboriginal people. Not to say that we don't have non-Indigenous people in those types of programs, because obviously expertise is something that we need, but it's in partnership. Why this research? As I explained before, looking at the overall wellness of Aboriginal community, I think this is a linchpin opportunity, doing this research, to actually improve the wellbeing and the wellness of Aboriginal communities. I'm obviously a social worker, a very proud social worker, loved being a social worker, still love being a social worker. And I'm also love being an Aboriginal social worker, because I think it actually lends itself. Being an Aboriginal person lends itself to social work, because we are all about community. We're all about our brothers and sisters, our community members. We're all part of a big family. And that's what social work is, to help each other and look after each other and make sure we are all okay. And I am experienced in dealing with childhood trauma, sexual assault, mental health, lots of different areas that I've worked in, drug and alcohol abuse, and we see this in the response to sexual assault for Aboriginal women. Some of the things that happen is the reactions to trauma, like substance misuse, domestic violence, mental health issues, etc. So just some points raised by the literature review. Family violence and sexual assault is still happening 20 years. I'm sure it's happened for longer than 20 years, but so this is what the data is telling us. In one study, Indigenous females were 27 times more likely to be hospitalised due to an assault nationally. Research in Western Australia identified between 1990 and 2004, the Aboriginal women were 4 times more likely to be raped. Indigenous populations recorded a higher percentage of sexual assault committed by other family members than non-Indigenous populations. And when you look at this data, you think, oh, that's terrible, but I don't think that's even the tip of the iceberg. Because I honestly think that there is so much more data out there that just isn't being recorded appropriately, isn't being understood that it's actually sexual assault. So this data might be awful, but I think the actual reality is much more awful. Okay, and for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander, as a linking together, recorded was 812, which equates to 34%, and we have a population of 3%. So, and the same period for sexual assault was non-Indigenous was 11%. So it's 3 times the rate in Queensland. Underreporting may be due to things like poor record keeping by organisations, victims not coming forward. Many Aboriginal people, for the reasons I've explained, particularly fear and hopelessness. I've had many people say to me things across my career, what would be the point? What's going to change? Because there is that level of hopelessness. And also fear. I had somebody say to me once, but if I complain about that doctor, then they won't look after me when I get sick. It's that, that rationale about if I just keep myself quiet, then I'm much more likely to be better long term. Plus, there's a general lack of research and for some valid reasons, I think this type of research needs to be completed by an Aboriginal person, needs to be completed by an Aboriginal woman, needs to be completed by an older Aboriginal woman who's from the area that the research is being done in. And I luckily tick all of those boxes, but also I've actually picked this research because I tick all those boxes. I've set it so that it is the best outcome in terms of this research for the Aboriginal community that I recognise. Obviously, we need to talk about the impact of colonisation and racism, and the level of violence which is normalised within Aboriginal communities is a direct result of colonisation and it's still being experienced. And barriers to engagement. I've talked about it, fear of blame. Not being believed is a huge issue, particularly if the perpetrator is a non-Indigenous person. And so if they're a non-Indigenous person, you will see a huge power imbalance with that as well. And the other part is if they go to government services and not being believed, which they actually fully expect to not be believed. So why would you then put yourself through that experience? I had a woman who had been in a domestic violence relationship. I managed to convince her in an ER to go and file for a protection order. And because I couldn't personally take her, I got somebody else to take her, and they put her in the front foyer and she was gone within 5 minutes. It's just that absolute overwhelming fear and hopelessness. We also do not know how formal systems work in Aboriginal communities due to lack of evaluation. Even if there is systems in place, how do they work? How do we know that they work? And there's a limited information into the effectiveness of acute care, but also other Western models we know haven't been successful. Like I just gave an example of, we have a whole system set up for domestic violence, but if Aboriginal people aren't going to participate in it because there's not a black face that they're seeing when they present there, there's a lack of understanding about repercussions if I go and put my partner, I don't want my partner to go to jail, what happens to my kids, etc. Okay, and we've talked about why I'm the best person to do this research, because I've set the research up so that so that I have cultural respect and cultural credibility within that community to undertake this research. And I think that those are two huge points in undertaking this research. And that's the reference list. Thank you very much for participating.